Well, for more on all this, we can go live to Washington and speak to PJ Crowley. He's the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, also the author of Red Line, American Foreign Policy in a Time of Fractured Politics and Failing States, which is perhaps a pretty good description of the situation we face right now. Thank you very much for speaking to us. We knew from the outset that there was this clash between President Trump and his Defense Secretary, and that was really laid bare in Mattis's resignation letter. Have we reached a watershed moment in the Trump presidency?
Well, certainly Jim Mattis was the last of the conventional foreign policy figures, within the Trump administration. Looks at the world differently than, say, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State. Now, with Jim Mattis's, stepping down, the question is who's going to give the president, perhaps a perspective rooted in fact and history that others have not. So we'll have to wait and see. But obviously, I think a lot of us in the foreign policy establishment are nervous about what this means.
Tell us more about where this nervousness stems from, because we know that Mattis was very much of the view that America's major strength was not its military, but its allies and its alliances. When you think about the rivals to the U.S. who are emerging in the world, where do your concerns lie now?
Well, really the question is, where do we go from here? In the context of Syria, it is fair to say that perhaps, the U.S. military has accomplished as much as it can in defeating the Islamic State Caliphate. There's still a redoubt along the Iraq border. But this decision appears to be based on impulse and not strategy. If we were, nothing has changed in the ground over the past 6 months. We're not necessarily on a cusp of a political breakthrough. So part of the logic of having U.S. forces remain in Syria was to make sure that the United States would have a seat at the table whenever there was the prospect of a political solution. And likewise, in the context of Afghanistan, as your previous package suggested, if in fact this is a gesture that will advance, negotiations, between the Taliban and the Afghan government, perhaps there's a strategic element to this. We don't know, but on the surface, it just seems to be that, even as, the president increased American forces in Afghanistan a few months ago, he made clear that his impulse was to pull out entirely. So, the challenge here is that, whether there's a strategy going forward, and that is not apparent at this point.
But according to President Trump's sort of America First worldview, there is no seat at the table for you. It means that you completely withdraw from countries like Syria and Iraq. That potentially allows America's opponents to get a stronger footing. There is no role played in any sort of reconstruction or rebuilding, and it also seems to mean complete abandonment of allies such as the Kurds in Syria.
No question, this is consistent with the agenda that President Trump promoted on the campaign trail and the agenda that he has pursued, since his arrival in the Oval Office. It is testament to the fact that candidate Trump meant what he said, and he is pursuing these policies, notwithstanding that they will be popular with his base here in the United States. It is the reality that we are rewriting the rules of American engagement in the world, and in fact we are accelerating a retreat, from America's global responsibilities in the world. You can ask yourself the obvious question: if the United States is pulling back as dramatically as the president is suggesting, who is going to lead the effort to resolve the conflict in Syria or the conflict in Yemen? Who is Afghanistan going to, reorder itself in some natural fashion, absent a significant role by the United States and its NATO allies? The answer is no. So in this retreat, we are leaving a vacuum, and that's very concerning in terms of how these significant conflicts are going to resolve themselves over time.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your insight with us, PJ Crowley, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs in Washington.